All right, guys. So if you've got a Kawasaki Z900RS and you're thinking about going with that 16-tooth front sprocket, but your only resource for any information on this has been some internet posts, and you haven't really heard anybody talk about this from firsthand experience, well, allow me to give you my impressions of it. So I am going to speak on this from the point of view of a stock motorcycle and then from the point of view of a modified bike. So let's identify the problem. What a lot of guys have a problem with these bikes is that they seem to be overly aggressively geared. First gear, you can't even get through an intersection without having to shift gears. Rolling into the throttle quickly in stock form, you've got the limiters that are in play that'll keep the front end from popping up too quickly, but it'll still come up, and when it does, the nannies freak out and the party's over. Sixth gear, it seems like you're looking for that proverbial seventh gear that doesn't exist, and the gear split through the middle of the gear range just seems to run out of steam kind of quickly. It always feels like the bike is on top of the gear, so to speak. It's not a very traditional gearing for a bike that, well, frankly, looks like that. You don't really expect a bike like that to have hooning type of gearing. For a bike like this, you want something that's going to be able to accelerate fast without a whole lot of interference necessarily from all of the nannies in play, should you have them in play. And well, quite frankly, it just seems to be a bit annoying. It can make the bike seem a little bit jumpy, and if you compare the bike to other motorcycles, it can take a hot minute to get used to because that aggressive gearing makes it a little bit twitchy coming off of stoplights. So how do you fix that? And is there going to be any performance downgrade? Well, I'm happy to report that the 16-tooth front sprocket for a stock bike would be perfect. The reason why is because you could actually utilize first gear. You could roll into the throttle hard in first gear without near as much nanny interference. And with the stock limiters in play, it would be perfect because now you can use all of first gear as an acceleration gear without having to worry about that annoying nanny kicking in. And in sixth gear, you get the benefit of having, well, quite frankly, a sixth gear, a highway gear for these bikes if you're going to be riding the bike on the highway for any real length of time. But there's another benefit to the gearing swap on a stock bike, or any bike for that matter. What it will do is it will make the middle portion of the gears seem like they are a little bit meatier. It gives the bike a little bit more of a rich riding experience. And in saying that, it also gives it a more of a, well, the way you expect a bike that looks like these motorcycles to ride like. You don't necessarily want one of these things to be super hoon ability laden. That's the XSR 900 trait if you want something like that. This bike, if you want it to have longer legs and you want something that is going to be basically more appropriate for this bike, in my opinion, go with the 16-tooth front sprocket if you've got a stock bike. But what if you've got a modified bike? How does it respond then? Well, my motorcycle has got a Brock Street Meg full exhaust. It's got an Ivan's tune to go along with it. It's got the Airbox mod, and it's got a K&N filter with the stock velocity stacks. The bike's making a lot more power. It's making about 18% more power, as a matter of fact, with no limiters, and that is really where this comes into play. If you've gone this far with your motorcycle, you already know what I'm about to say as far as how the nannies come into play in first and now second gear. Just a quick rolling onto the throttle and off of the clutch. Because there are no limiters in play, the bike wants to accelerate pretty hard. You get a little bit of the float of the front wheel, and immediately the nannies come in and it kills the party already. So that alone is enough to make the bike actually feel slower with the stock gearing, or at least it's more annoying. You really can't get into the throttle until you're into later gears, at least until, well, maybe the top is second, certainly into third, you should be safe. But you're still also looking for that seventh gear on the big end, and now that you've got more power through the middle, well, the middle gears are basically, you're really on top of it. It almost feels like the bike is ahead of the gearing now. To put that 16-tooth front sprocket on a well-modified motorcycle like this one is the mandatory mod, at least in my way of riding, which is to say fast and spirited. Because now with that gearing, my motorcycle feels like it gets to speeds like around 120 or 130 plus miles an hour far more quickly than it did with the stock gearing, because it stays in that meaty part of the power band. Again, now with the modifications, my bike makes peak power from about 9,000 to 9,500 RPM, where it carries power very well. Stock, it makes peak power around 8,500 RPM. The point here is that these motorcycles make their power lower in the RPM range. That 16-tooth front sprocket allows you to capture that torque and hang on to it for longer. And really, that's the point of this bike. It's got longer legs. It's got a more muscly feel to it now with those longer gears that are in place. I really feel like the bike should have come like this from the factory. Add to that the benefit with that 16-tooth front sprocket with a modified bike with all your limiters removed, but your nanny's still kind of in play. The bike now acts like it did stock with the nannies in play on a stock bike with stock gearing, in that I can roll into the throttle fairly hard in first gear. Yeah, I'll float the front tire, but the nannies are still there a little bit, but not nearly as bad as they were. I can grab second, the bike will start to set down, nannies go away, and I'm on my way to the races. That is a cool feeling. I can accelerate significantly harder and have more fun with the bike with the 16-tooth front sprocket than I could ever have with that 15. The 15 was actually starting to get really annoying for me. 6 gear now is nowhere near as buzzy, and it feels like a proper highway gear. And to that point, guys, you're in a fine part of the power band on this bike. It starts making peak torque, or good torque, I should say, around 4,000 RPM, peak torque around 65-ish, 100. Well, you're starting to get into that nice wave of torque that these bikes have. I didn't really get anything taken away from me in terms of just roll-on throttle response on the highway. It's all still pretty much there, and it's there in a little bit softer form. So it's not as buzzy. It feels like it's a lot happier going down the highway. In general, the bike for me, especially with the modifications that I have, is far and away happier. So I would say yes. If it's a question of should I do it? Yeah, I would for sure. If you're spending a lot of time on the street and doing long distances, or at least long sweepers, highway runs, stuff like that, yeah, you're going to want this modification. If you're hitting a whole lot of twisties, I would say leave the 15-tooth up front, go up a couple in the back. That'll be the equivalent of my bike now going 1 down and 2 up, which is a more traditional modification for a sport bike. So with all of that being said, what do you think? Is this a modification that you would consider now? And if you have done this modification, how do you like it? Did you go with the 17-tooth, which is not as popular, but available modification? Did you do the modification with either 16 or 17 and go back to 15? And if so, why'd you do that? Post up down below. Hope this helps you out. We'll catch you on the next one. Adios.